Howdy, Shasta College. How's it going? How was your weekend? How do you think you did in the quiz? I see a lot of people didn't do the quiz. That's too bad because it's 15 points. Um, I won't start grading those for a little bit, so have some patience. Well, this week we're still in this golden age of Hollywood cinema that the documentary covered, and I've been covering for a week or so. But what the film documentary didn't cover was a subgenre of independent film cinema that started in about 1970 or thereabouts, and they referred to it as blaxploitation. Um, it's a term that some feel is kind of derogatory. I probably agree with that, but that's how they explained it. Meaning it kind of dampens the seriousness of the intent of the filmmakers because these were black films directed by black directors, written by black writers, starring black actors. And it's like in the documentary, I'll post it today. Samuel Jackson said, it's called exploitation, we have no idea. But exploitation in this kind of genre, uh, they used to call it grindhouse cinema. It was cheap movies made to exploit um, themes or genre to get quick money, and in that way, it did do that. Is it a good word? Exploitation usually means they're abusing some race, sex, or political stance. Probably not. But there is all sorts of exploitation in cinema. Is it still going on to this day? You tell me. Um, but two films popped up and changed everything there was to change for about 5 or 6 years in Hollywood, actually. When the films were playing that the documentary they took a quiz about, uh, when those films were popular, these films were equally as popular, maybe more so in some areas of the country. Now, what was happening is black audiences looked up at the cinema, they didn't see anything they could relate to. Nobody's telling their story. There's very few African American actors in any of these movies. Famous movies from The Godfather, The Conversation to Mean Streets. It's all very white America, and so um, filmmaker by the name of Robert Gordon Parks, rather, who was known as a still photographer, um, got the job to direct an action film about a cool private detective. Yes, it was written for a white guy, but they decided to go a different direction and they cast a black actor, Richard Roundtree. And the movie had a great famous soundtrack and it was called Shaft. Maybe you've heard of it. They made several sequels, Shaft in Africa, Return of Shaft. He was this cool private eye who dressed cool. He got the girl, by the way, and he solved the cases. And there's a lot of action in between. And sometimes he'd go up against the white status quo. Well, that was released into the movie theaters, and their projected audiences were inner city um, population around the country, places like Pittsburgh and Detroit and Chicago, LA and New York. And what Hollywood, as usual, isn't known for its visionary outlook, but it does follow the money. Sorry, I'm coughing. It does look for the money. They saw that Shaft was raking in the dollars, but not just with inner city black audiences. White audiences responded also. The audience now is young audience is composed now of a lot of college students, a lot of socially aware people, and who didn't want to be shut out of something because of their skin, and so they started showing up with these movies as audiences too. The lines went around the block. Hollywood perked up. Before that was happening, another film, a really low budget black exploitation film um, called Sweetback Badass, directed and written by Marvin Van Peebles, stars him too. That also showed up, and this it's was pretty risque for the time. It's pretty risque right now. You can watch it. Tell me. It's on YouTube, I believe. Um, it's about a dude, a black dude, played by the guy who wrote it and directed it, who is a sex worker. Folks, he performs live sex acts in nightclubs. That's his thing, and then he gets upside down with the law. The law is after him, and the rest of the movie it's a chase film. The white established police force is after this dude. And when you watch the documentary, I hope you watch it, that I'll post on Canvas later on today. The reason why the film was controversy is because he gets away. He actually gets away at the very end of the movie. And at the very end, it says he gets away and he'll come back, probably to get revenge, supposedly. But the thing is this is really rare because he is, after all, pursued by white police. And if you know anything about white police and black fugitives, it usually doesn't end well. They usually end up in prison or getting gunned down while he escapes all these things to prove his innocence and to find a way back into the social fabric of a very separated country at the time. What was happening in the country? I hope you got some of this on your quiz. We had the civil rights movement that started in the 50s and came to a head in the 60s. It started getting uh, some real traction in the 70s. Then we had to go through the assassinations of black leaders like Martin Luther King and Malcolm X, Medgar Evers, and others had to die for their cause before white America gave black America an equal opportunity in the culture. In some parts of the country in the 70s, when these films were being made, Jim Crow was still in effect. That's a law that came about 100 years before. It's named after a vaudeville character who's um, a crow, folks, a sloven, lazy crow, there for laughter, doesn't do any good, doesn't contribute to society. This law was actually about how to treat black people under the eyes of the law. And one of the main caveats was you could legally hang somebody, a black person, if they spoke to or possibly even looked at a white woman. Um, if you ever watched the great movie or read the book To Kill a Mockingbird, that's what this topic is. He is being railroaded, and Atticus Finch gets at the truth and he gets off. But Jim Crow was still on the books in a lot of West Southern states. You could literally legally and get away with it, get away with murder under certain circumstances. Recently, there's been the case of Emmett Till, who was literally a 14-year-old boy. There's a new movie out by it about him right now. I mean, he went to visit his cousins in the South. His mother says they treat blacks very differently in the South, to be very, very careful. Well, he was a kid, and so he wasn't careful enough. And he's in a white area, and he makes a comment to a white woman. That's all he does. He whistles at her in the cat call of a pretty woman. Well, her relatives tracked him down the next day and um, hung him for his whistle. So he's 14 years old, folks. And guess what? They got away with it. They got away with murder. The woman who testified said she lied under oath. She just recently came out and said she lied. She just recently died. This happened in the 50s. So just as we all think we're civilized and slavery's over, they hung a 14-year-old boy for essentially talking to a white woman uh, as a death sentence. So these movies were very current in the times and the social fabric of the country. Vietnam War was raging. And guess what? A large part of the army that we were sending over there were black Americans because white Americans, so many of them had student deferments. You could stay in college. And there was a lot more white people going to college than black people because of finances and other things. And so there was an inordinate amount of African American males fighting and dying in Vietnam. That's happening when these films came out. This injustice, plus the assassinations of the black leadership. That's the background of these films that's playing there. So to stand up to white America, you could get yourself killed or hung. And so these films, that's the background of it. Well, there was huge box office successes, and when there's money to be made, Hollywood knows how to make a dollar. And so now they're going to get into the business of black cinema. And so they started churning this stuff out, and they watered it down pretty fast with movies like they just essentially remade a lot of movies that were white movies at one time, like gangster films. They did Black Caesar, monster movies. Instead of Dracula, they had Blackula. Yeah, I know, Blackula. It was a huge success, though. And then white people started writing these scripts. They started not hiring black directors. They gave it to white directors. And of course, the thing got so watered down within 4 or 5 years, the movement was essentially over because Hollywood came in and, as usual, misread the audience. But in the meantime, there's some superb black exploitation films made. Pam Grier, who just turned 73 this year, maybe you know her. She's an actress, been around a long time. If you see the Quentin Tarantino movie Jackie Brown, she plays Jackie Brown. Um, she's also was in a series about lesbians called The L Word. She played one of the few non-lesbians in the series, very successful series. So, but she started off in these films, and she played a series of films that were very, very popular about tough, sexy African American women who were not taking any crap from anybody. Foxy Brown, you ought to watch it. It's very highly entertaining, highly sexual, and she seeks revenge on her brother, who was purposely OD'd by some white drug dealers, black drug dealers. She gets revenge on them. But in the meantime, there's plenty of sex and a nudity. And Pam was like the forerunner of the powerful, empowered female black woman, inner city black woman we never seen before. She wasn't afraid. She wasn't sitting back and letting crap happen to her. She got payback. She was righteous in her indignation. Um, she made many of these films, some successful, some Not so. There were other black actresses. Look at the documentary. Tell me what you think about it. I want to have a discussion about the documentary, um, but I'll wait for you guys to watch it before you pipe in. Do you here'd be the question? Do you ever see black cinema now? I mean, who's directing black cinema? Well, there's quite a few that's starting. Uh, Keegan Peele has directed a couple horror films, really successful, made a lot of money. Get Out and his last one, I can't remember the name. It just came out. I want to see it, but I don't have it. Haven't seen it yet. Uh, he was half of a comedy duo, Keegan Peele. He's a brilliant writer and director, and he's chosen horror as his genre to explore his themes of alienation in white America. Um, there are other black directors working more so than ever before. They even big budget movies like Black Panther um, are finally being helmed by black directors, but they had to prove themselves. And this 1970s was a bust out decade for a lot of auteur directors to prove themselves, not just white American, but black Americans. Um, what is your idea? What's your idea? Do you have a preference? Do you respond to these films? Does it matter what people's skin color is, or what does it? Not that we're talking about that right now, but we will talk about it later. But now the opening up of the trans community and the sexually um, queer movement is really important. I'm not going to talk about that this week, though. I'm going to save that. We're going to get to it though. Um, is it all inclusive, or does these certain genres bother you, or what's your feeling about them? We'll have a discussion about it. Or do you care, or do you not pay attention to any of it? So, in the meantime, there was another great movie about a drug dealer, um, Superfly. That's where the term comes from. If you guys know your hip hop language, where it started from is these movies. Superfly had a great soundtrack by Curtis Mayfield. Um, it's about a drug dealer, very flamboyant drug dealer out of the '70s, folks. So yes, they drive the big Cadillacs, and they have fur coats and platform shoes, and they play the pimp. He's a pimp, and he's also a drug dealer, and he's going to make one last score before he goes straight. And Ron Neal was the actor. He did a wonderful job. He's cool, he's sexy, and nobody messes with him. Black gangsters or white cops don't mess with Superfly. And once again, it's an inner city story about a drug dealer. Um, so often these stories, blaxploitation, deal with inner city drug use, exploitation of black people not getting a fair shake in the world that we live in. A great series came out 10 years, 20 years ago called The Wire. And it pitted black drug dealers in Baltimore against police, and some of the police were black. It just wasn't an issue on skin, except for the future is pretty bleak for many African Americans living in inner cities and dealing drugs. It might seem reprehensible to you, but when you're 12 and 13 and you have nobody's hiring you for anything, and someone will say, "You want to make $500 a day?" It looks pretty good. There's too bad. There's always usually violence that is surrounded by it. The Wires and Exit series really shows you black drug dealers and shows their side of it. They're not the bad guys. They're not the good guys either. And the police aren't the bad guys, and they're not the good guys also. Um, because in the world we live in, it's hard to find out who the good guys are. And that series is excellent and showing the different nature of what is good, what is bad, and what is this necessity to survive in this world. So where was I? So there was a series of these films that I want you guys to watch the documentary. It's under an hour. You'll enjoy it. Um, Films are made in color on low budgets, and a lot of them made a lot of money for somebody. When white Hollywood came calling because they know how to make money, they watered it down, and the series got kind of ludicrous and not as serious. And they were really trying to appeal to white audiences only, uh, and the black audiences kind of turned off the whole thing. And so the movement that was started in this really revolutionary, pure way was co-opted and run into the ground by the profiteers. So watch the documentary. Give me your heads up, thumbs up, thumbs down, what you think about it. Um, I'm going to sign a paper at the end of the week. Not yet. There'll be another essay. It's coming. Hope you guys are doing well. It's getting cooler, starting to feel like fall out there. Keep watching movies. Keep writing strong. Write honest. Write the truth. Story film continues next time.